let me introduce you to Bryan because you haven't met him before, or if you maybe you have, but depending on the scenario, right?
And regret it.
Yeah. For example, right, this picture at the top clearly is not a work picture, right? There's no way this could possibly be during working hours or anything like that. But yeah, I need to find some different pictures of you in some different outfits there, Bryan. But I thought I'd just throw a few up here that I happened to find on Twitter when I scanned for your name. So.
Yeah. Thanks, Mark.
Yeah.
That's all Mark Godfrey, by the way. Thanks, Mark.
All right. So let's hand it over to you. I'll stop sharing and it's all yours.
All right. Awesome. Let me share my screen. Let's see how badly I can screw that up. All right. Can you see my screen?
Yep, looks good.
Okay, good. Awesome. All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Bryan Dam. I've been blogging for a while at damgoodadmin.com. Currently, I'm a software engineer at Recast Software. We're the maker of the right-click tools. And a lot of the material I'm talking about today is why I mentioned this last point. I'm the moderator on the Reddit, the SCCM Reddit. I'm there all the time. And so, as you can imagine, the last couple of months has been very, very interesting as we all move to this highly work from home scenario. And our subreddit has been lighting up with questions about how to make all this happen and the struggles thereof. And so on some level, I'm probably a month, 2 months too late. If you've had fires, you've fought those fires. And yet there's been so much really great information that's come out from Microsoft, right? Whether it's the project manager, Rob York, there's some PFEs. There's just so much great info that it's really, 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 really hard to consume it all. And even in my own mind, it was like I was trying to figure out, what are the different problems, and what's sort of in my mind, like what would a mental flow chart be of working through these things. And so that's sort of the genesis of this presentation or this session. And a few months ago, not months, weeks ago. Adam Gross and I just did an off-the-cuff thing. We're like, hey, let's just get a bunch of people on. And we talked through a whole bunch of stuff. And some of the things I'm talking about here, we came up, but it was all very, very kind of scatterbrained. And it was fun.
And mostly wrong.
Yeah, right? I mean, and since then, so much good info has come out. And so I wanted to kind of call that all together. And so instead of a deep 500 level dive, I'm not going to do a bunch of demos. I may not even have to open up the console. What I want to do is walk through some of those options. And again, based on the conversation we've already had, I think a bunch of you are doing a bunch of this, right? Which is great. But not everybody knows everything, all the options. And so I wanted to try and there's a lot of them. So it's going to take us a while to go through, but I wanted to go at least at a high level and try and work through some of these. And the goal is that you can look at what you're doing now and say, okay, are there pieces of this that I can improve, right? That I can implement in a way that's going to improve what I'm already doing. Because again, we've all been through 1 or 2 months of Patch Tuesday, so you've probably fought the fires. But are there again, can you do better than what you're doing right now? Let me see if I can. I don't know if I can get the chat open. Otherwise, I will at the same time in Teams. But I try and look at that. So here's briefly the agenda. Quick preamble, and then what I want to do is kind of work through what are the easy solutions, right? What's the kind of stuff that as a system administrator you can just go do yourself, and there's some really great stuff you can do there. But then there's going to be the next level stuff, the harder stuff that I think brings more benefits, but 10 to 1, you're going to need to talk to some other teams, right? If you're a really small business, maybe you're a one-man IT shop. The team is you. But for a lot of us, it's going to be, I can't just go do these things. And I need to talk it out, and it's kind of a longer-term solution. So that's the brief agenda. You can see I've clearly stolen the slide deck look and feel from MMS, but I told Greg, so I feel okay about it. So let's get into it. Here's the preamble. Let's kind of get real for a second. There's no free lunch. And this is what we were talking about a little bit about this in the roundtable. And you might say, okay, everybody has a VPN or they have a CMG. And yet on Reddit, we've had 3 solid posts where someone's like, I have a part of my business that we set up with a VPN. But then, the business just said, we're working from home tomorrow, right? And they just sent large swaths of their team home. And so the question is, okay, I don't have a VPN, or I have a VPN, but I didn't send people home with a VPN-enabled device, right? Because there was no time. And I don't have a CMG set up, right? What do I do? And the answer to that, I think, is more or less game over. If you don't have either a VPN or a CMG, it's kind of game over in sort of what script do I write? How do I just magically wave my hands and at scale get things back on? It's just not a pretty situation. And again, the question has come up, and so I would want to just get that out of the way. Like, if you don't have those two other things, it's just painful, because to get that device back into a managed state, I think really requires local admin access, right? Whether that's somebody physically sitting on that device who has local admin and has the knowledge to go, enroll it into Intune, or to do some of the CMG stuff we'll talk about later. Like if they have local admin access and they would do, great, but that tends not to work at scale. What would I do if I was absolutely forced, right? If somebody literally put a gun to my head and said, this is the situation, what are you going to do about it? What would I do? I would really be looking at making sure my Wi-Fi is really strong in my parking lot, right? If everyone's got laptops and to be fair, you probably have a VPN anyways, right? Like, what's the scenario? But let's say you did. Let's say you sent a bunch of VPN stuff home. You pulled out the pool laptops and you have VPN. I'd make sure your parking lot has Wi-Fi, and then you can take all these solutions we're going to talk about and craft something that's drive-by, right? Like, hey, you don't need to come into the office. You don't need to get out of your car. Drive into the parking lot. Whip open your laptop, and we'll try and bring you back into a manageable state. A big problem, though, that I know people have had is well, what if you didn't have the hardware, right? Getting hardware right now is kind of actually difficult. China was shut down for several months, and that's where most of our hardware comes from. And so a lot of people were caught down with, the stories we had in the roundtable. People are configuring desktops. Why? Well, because they probably couldn't buy laptops if they wanted to. And so what do you do? That's really where I want to say thin client architecture, but I hate thin clients. So, but that's really where remote desktop is really your solution, right? Whether that's Citrix. I think, Adam, you mentioned you guys are doubling down on your Citrix usage. There's, like, I don't like it. But it's if you don't have the hardware, it's a perfect. It's a great solution in an imperfect situation. So whether it's Citrix, VMware, Horizon View, and then Windows, Microsoft has come out with Windows Remote Desktop. Windows Virtual Desktop. Sorry, I need to change that. Windows Virtual Desktop, and that's an Azure-based solution. And as I mentioned again in some of the earlier talk, like, I know some people that 3-4 months ago were interested in Windows Virtual Desktop, and they went from interested to I am now working nonstop trying to make those engagements happen, right? So, and what I like about the Windows Virtual Desktop is I think it's a great stopgap solution, right? If you want to, if you didn't have Citrix set up before, or weren't ready for this kind of scale, like, to get it to there is kind of a deal, right? Like, it's an ordeal. It's not a quick fix. If you had a VMware Horizon View and if it's all on-prem, like, it's hard to set all that stuff up in COVID, in the current situation. Again, if you could get the hardware to do it. So a cloud-based virtual desktop solution, I think, is really, really perfect. If you're in this situation, right, where you couldn't send hardware home, absolutely, that to me is a beautiful solution. So again, that's the preamble. From here on, we're going to assume you have VPN, and I know that is the vast majority, right? Like, I get it. To Adam's point, like, most people, big bank is going to have a VPN, right? So I get it. I just wanted to cover that because, again, I have 3 distinct posts where people didn't. So what I want to first do here is talk about the easy stuff. And again, and I'm labeling this, let's stop the bleeding, right? And again, you probably have done this somehow. But what, as a system admin, you're a configuration administrator, administrator of configuration manager, what are the things you can do without having to talk to other departments? And there's two things, basically. And the first is low extra delay background support. LEDBAT. I love LEDBAT. I'm a huge LEDBAT fan. I celebrate its entire collection. And again, I don't know if I mentioned this, but I'm going to link to like the crap out of things in this deck. And so we'll get the deck up there. Actually, this whole session, the blog came first, so I have a blog written too. So between one of those two things, there's going to be tons and tons of links for you to go read more deeply than in the overviews we're going to give here, or I'm going to give here. But so if you want a deep dive, not a deep dive, but a better overview of LEDBAT, go read that by Daniel Havey. He's Win10 Transports on Twitter. But it's a sender-side congestion protocol. And protocol might not be the right word, but I'm gonna go with it. And the beautiful thing about that combination of words is it's sender-side, so there's no client-side configuration or requirements, right? Your Windows XP devices will can take the benefit of a LEDBAT-enabled source perfectly. And the key to LEDBAT is that it's latency-based, right? And so what it's going to do is, as it's sending data to the endpoint, it's going to track, well, how long is that round trip taking? And if the latency increases, what LEDBAT is going to do is say, well, I'm going to just send less data. And so it's reacting very, very quickly. There's some great content out there. You can see how quickly LEDBAT will throttle back. But the key is because it's latency is measured across the whole connection, right? I don't care what part of the pipe is slow or congested. If it is, I'll pull back. And to me, this is just beautifully made for a VPN connection. Because if that single throttling, that single bottleneck gets jammed up, all your LEDBAT enabled DPs and config manager, all that stuff's going to throttle way back very, very quickly. There's a couple of requirements here. Your DPs need to be at least server 2016 or greater. LEDBAT was actually initially introduced in server 2019, and this is crazy because Microsoft almost never backport stuff, but they actually backported it back to server 16, which is great. And I've met people who said, well, I have one DP and it's on my primary site server, and we don't have, I don't really want to update that to 2016, or we really aren't pushing 2016 and rolling that out yet. We're still in 2012. I don't really care. My moving desk, I just clicked that, sorry. That's kind of weird. I would just spin one up. If you have a VM, like if you have any kind of VM infrastructure, or heck, I don't even care, just take an old desktop and put server 2016 on it if you don't have VMs, but crying out loud, you gotta have a VM. Just spin up server 2016 just for the DP role, just to get LEDBAT. I think that it's worth it just for those things. And the other thing you need, it's not really a technical requirement, I guess, but in Config Manager Current Branch 1806, they built this right in. There's literally a single checkbox. This is the other beautiful thing. LEDBAT is stupidly easy to enable. There's just simply no reason. There's no reason not to go enable LEDBAT on every single distribution point in your entire organization. If you are a GUI person, you can just go in there and you can just go to the properties, you go to general and you simply click it. That's it. That's all you need to do. Do you have, like I did in my last organization, you literally had 260 something plus DPs, and I can hear Brian Mason and Mike Terrell just cringe right now. Great. There's a single line. There's a single line PowerShell script, right? I wouldn't call it a script, but a one-liner PowerShell there. You can go ahead and enable that on all your distribution points. So it's super powerful, super easy to make happen. But okay, there's no free lunch, right? So LEDBAT isn't always a confetti farting unicorn. There's that one guy, and on the blog I'll link you to it. But there was one guy his MLPS line, the way that they throttled didn't increase latency, right? So they would hit 100% on that line, and then they would just throw out traffic. And I don't know what magic voodoo they were doing, but it would not increase latency. And so his experience was not to see LEDBAT enabled. So yeah, if you can fill up your pipe, and in doing so you don't increase latency, like the congestion doesn't lead to latency, then LEDBAT's not going to work for you. I think that's super rare. I just haven't seen that be a big problem. The other problem to consider is, well, what if there's, you enable LEDBAT and LEDBAT throttles back, but due to all the other traffic, whether it's during the day when your laptops are on, that there's just no available bandwidth at all for LEDBAT to use, right? Because if the line is 100% utilized, or as close to 100% as you can get, even without your config manager leadbat traffic, what's going to happen? Well, leadbat will just sit there and not do anything, right? And in that case, devices are never going to get content, right? They're never going to download those updates and applications, right? So that might not be great. That's not ideal. And then the other thing that we'll do, whether this is a con, this is the design, right? The design is to try to use 100% of the available connection, right? It's not going to try and use 70% of your connection, 80% of your connection, 90, 95, 98. It will try and use as much as your connection as it can without introducing more than 60 milliseconds, I believe, of latency. Now, what this means is your networking team probably is going to hate you. I mean, more than they already do, for good reason. Because you're still going to trigger all their alarms, right? I don't know what they have it set at your organization, but my last place that I worked at, we had one of those managers, and you know the manager I'm talking about. He literally had a red klaxon tied to his to the main internet pipeline alert, and when it went above, I want to say like 85 or 90% or something like that, it would go off with sound and all. It was just crazy. That guy really, really hated leadbat because, again, by design, it's going to try and use all of that. So they're going to hate you. And you might lose this argument, right? I'll be honest. Whether you win or lose just depends on the organization you're in. But what I did was, I'm like, you're wrong in terms of there's user impact, right? They'd be like, oh, you're crushing all this other content. I'm like, well, what other content, right? Like, tell me what other content you believe that I'm impacting. Show me the user that's complaining about this, because you might be at 100% utilization, or again, you don't almost never get to 100%, but very, very close to it. But if 80% of that bandwidth is leadbat traffic, then there's really no user impact, right? If that user need non-leadbat traffic needed 50% of it, it'll get it, right? What if you are the network admin, though, right? If you're like, I'm that person who looks at those graphs and I hate that alert. I tell you, get over it, like I just described. Just get over yourself and forget the alerts, but fine. You want to worry about it. I'm going to refer to this blog a couple of times, written by some great German PFEs, Jonas, Roland, and Stefan. And they go into detail here, but on your distribution points, or really any IIS, right? This isn't specific to config manager. Leadbat wasn't specific to config manager. We'll talk about that in a second. And this stuff isn't specific to config manager anyway either, right? You can set IIS maximum bandwidth, and it's stupid easy to do, right? You open up IIS manager, default website, advanced setting limits, and set your maximum bandwidth. And there you go, right? That DP will now only poop out X amount of bandwidth, and that way you can make sure that leadbat isn't sucking it all up. There's the chat. Finally, sorry, I've been trying to like half of my attention. Like, can I find where this chat is? Just brought it up. Beautiful. 60 milliseconds, too much for counter. Okay. So you can set the IIS maximum bandwidth. It's really, really easy to do. The downside of this strategy is it's super easy, but it's going to impact all your endpoints, right? If you have an on-prem distribution point, an on-prem distribution point that's serving your servers, for instance, well, IIS maximum bandwidth, it doesn't really care what the endpoint, what the destination is. It's just gonna limit it, and so it's easy to do, but it's kind of dumb. Right, it's not an intelligent way to set that bandwidth. So the other thing that they outline, which isn't hard, but it's a little more finicky, right? You can actually, on that local box, you can use local group policy to create a quality of service policy, your own dedicated quality of purpose QoS just for that one box. And the key thing here, and again, not hard to do, it's computer configuration, Windows settings, policy-based QoS. But the thing here is you can actually specify the destination of the subnets that allow you to target. That allows you to just do your VPN clients. Now, I forget who it was who had like 20 or 30 VPN subnets, so that might still be painful. But it allows you to limit this on your side as a non-network administrator and it allows you to do it in a more intelligent way that will only impact your VPN or your remote clients, right? So the other thing is that Leadbat, again, I was alluding to earlier, it's not a config manager feature, it's an OS feature. And so while the product team did put that in there in 1806, they added that checkbox for distribution points. I don't know if I have a user voice yet, but we should have like a deep Leadbat checkbox for everything. Everything should have a Leadbat checkbox in config manager. There should just be nothing that's without it. You can see a couple of blogs up there. One's from 2 Point talking about enabling Leadbat on WSUS, and then the next one is talking more generally. In fact, that's where I took this PowerShell from the bottom on. But it's an OS Lizard feature, and it can do anything that uses TCP. So you can do it on your primary sites, right? If you enable on your primary site, that primary site or your CAS, so inner site traffic, you can enable Leadbat for. Your push down to your normal push DPs from your primary site down there, that Leadbat will work there. Your content that your clients are getting through your management points, your software update points, everything you can enable Leadbat for. And something that really occurred to me when I was writing this slide is we need configuration items for these. And I said that on Twitter, and I said, hey, Mike, I know that Sherry Kissinger she seems to live and breathe configuration items. I'm wondering if they had those, and we're not sure. We would still check, but Cody was like, "Oh, I'll write one for WSUS." So there's a link there to his CI for enabling WSUS. But again, doing it by hand really isn't that hard, right? Here's the 2 lines at the bottom, right? You're just enabling Leadbat, and you're saying, "Hey, here's the port range, right? The local port, the start and end. It could be the same number there, and then here's the remote one, right?" And do those things, and you've just enabled Leadbat for anything. So there you go. I've spent about 10, 15 minutes talking about Leadbat because I just love it. And I think it's your first line of defense, and it's something that you can totally do without, again, you don't need to talk to your networking people. You can just be able to do that. The other one, and this might throw you, but stay with me, is BranchCache, right? BranchCache is dedupe across the wire, sort of. And there's a link up that at the top there. It's literally just, that is the PowerShell command. You can run enable-bc local, and it'll enable BranchCache in local cache mode. Before we talk about that, what is high level? How does BranchCache work, and why does it make sense for what we're talking about, right? So BranchCache, and I'm oversimplifying, and that's I'm okay. I can live with that. BranchCache will maintain this local deduped cache of file chunks, right? So everything it downloads, the content it's downloading, it'll take that content, it'll break it up into chunks, puts it in its cache, and if it already has the chunk, it doesn't need to store it again, right? That's the dedupe part of it. Now, so when your device is then, not only it has its own BranchCache, but when it talks to a BranchCache enabled distribution point or source, right, then it can now do dedupe across the wire. Your BranchCache enabled client and your BranchCache enabled distribution point are going to talk to each other, and your client will say, well, I have this in my cache already, I don't need it. Right, I already have this data. So if you think about update contents that are cumulative, it's not perfect. Actually, I'd love to get the Windows Update team on board to make that better. Some of the things they do make it less than ideal, but you can still get solidly like 30 to 40% traffic reduction. And I think Mike actually has Mike Terrell, I think you have a blog out there talking about that, and I should have linked it to above. But show some really great returns on investment there. Now I know what you might be thinking. BranchCache, that's a peer-to-peer technology. Why, in sweet goodness, would I want to enable that on my VPN clients? That sounds dumb. First of all, I mean, peer-to-peer, BranchCache is peer-to-peer based on broadcast traffic. And 10 to 1, you're not enabling broadcast traffic among your VPN subnets. Probably not. I don't think so. So it shouldn't be a problem at all. But this is what's key about this enable-bc local. This is local cache mode. Right, so all you're telling the client to do is create, every time you download something, let's put it into the cache. But it will not itself download content from other peers, right? It's not going to look for peers for content, and it will not respond to peers that ask for content on its subnet, right? So if you're concerned about the broadcast thing and working across VPN, the local cache mode solves all of that for you. So again, all you need to do is go run enable.bc local on every device. And yeah, Mike has a link here. There's probably some more to do that, but these are easy things you can do. Leadbat and BranchCache are like the most beautiful things you can do. And those, again, I keep saying it. It's the easy stuff that you probably don't need to talk to a lot of people to do. You're an administrator. You can go into IIS on your distribution points or all your site servers. And I realize maybe some people can't do that. I get it. But you can do it. The hard stuff, Godspeed and good luck. Let's talk about the more difficult things, right? Let's say you have a VPN, but it's user-based, right? And that was very, very, very common 10, 15 years ago. It's like, okay, load it up and I'm going to log in with my my user credentials. And that's not bad. It's not terrible. But unless the user themselves has a reason to connect to the VPN, they're not going to do it, right? And now it's 2020. There's more reason. There's fewer reasons to connect to the VPN than there were 10, 15 years ago, right? Hopefully, a lot of you have moved away from having file servers sitting on-prem. You have a lot. You've moved stuff to the cloud, gotten stuff just off of that VPN. In terms of your users day-to-day, like, do they need connection to the VPN to open a Word file? Probably not. It's probably synced in some way to that local device, right? So it becomes unreliable, right? We as system administrators need that connection to be on there. We need that connection to be reliable and somewhat persistent for us to do our work. And so even if you have a user-based VPN right now, that's great, right? That's good. But you might look at right now, even in this situation, what would it look like to move to some sort of always-on VPN? And I'm saying that in the generic always-on VPN because we'll get to that later. The point is that an always-on VPN connects anytime, right? It's always on, and it's generally machine-based, right? It's not. As long as the machine is powered on and connected to the internet, it's going to have a secured connection to your on-prem internet, and so it solves all that stuff, right? Before the user even boots in, you have connection to that device, or that device has connection to you, I guess is the better way to say. Almost every third-party VPN vendor I'm aware of has some kind of always-on VPN solution, right? I'm not going to go into all of them. We're not going to talk about how you configure them. But if you have a VPN now, 10 to 1, you can talk to your vendor and be like, what would it take to make this an always-on solution? Microsoft itself has a solution. Previously, they referred to it as direct access, and that's transition. I don't want to say is it replaced? Like, I don't think direct access has become always-on VPN, but direct access is, for all intent and purposes, kind of deprecated within Config Manager. It's always-on VPN, and I put the trademark there, right? They're using the generic term for their specific implementation. It's built into Windows 10, right? So, and I should have looked. I don't know if they've actually backported always-on VPN to Windows 7. Somebody will probably pipe up in here and correct me. It does require PKI though, right? So the whole concept of moving from user to machine-based is your machine we're not using the user credentials to authenticate the VPN. We need to use something else, right? What's the machine? And that's going to almost always be a certificate, right? It's going to be a machine level certificate. So all of your machines need their own unique certificate. And the solution to that is to have PKI, right? So again, that's why this isn't necessarily an easy win, but it's a good one. So I want to spend some time on this one. Split tunneling. What is split tunneling? Most of us probably know what we're talking about here, but I always like to level set. Split tunneling is all about your client saying, well, I need some information from the internet. Right? I want to download that YouTube. We're going to watch that YouTube video, and that's going to come from the internet. Without split tunneling, with forced tunneling, I think is the technical term. With a VPN, what you're going to do is your device is going to talk to your VPN, so it's going to go into your organizations, your internet, come around back out your corporation's internet pipeline, hit YouTube, and then get that data back through your internet, through your on-prem, through your organization's internet connection, and then push it back. So it's this horrible double hit. And honestly, your average home user now everyone has high-speed internet. It's such a waste of your corporate bandwidth to do these things. And that's what split tunneling does, right? Split tunneling says, hey, if if I need some content from the internet, why don't I just go right to the internet and not through the VPN? And I want to be super clear. This is like the single most important configuration you can do to lower your VPN traffic. Nothing I talk about at all will even come close to making this happen. Now, here's the downside. A lot of network security teams don't like split tunneling, and I think a lot of it is, there's reasons, and I think those reasons are no longer as valid as they once were. The big concern is, well, think about architecturally what you just created. You're creating this thing called your device that's connected to the internet in an unprotected way, right? Or, I mean, it's on the internet. Let's put it that way. And it's also securely connected to our enterprise, and that's concerning. That seems like a really bad, insecure jump point. And back in 1990, sure, like that was a kind of a concern, but it's 2020 now. Defense in depth is a thing. All right, this isn't a niche kind of stuff. This isn't a niche configuration. And there's some great resources here I have for you. Tom Schneider, who's now the Azure Security PM, wrote some really, really great stuff about why this isn't a problem. And if you are still concerned, you don't have to split tunnel everything, right? If you still want YouTube coming through your pipe, fine, whatever. But you can just do update URLs, right? So, and here I have links to the software for the URLs or FQDNs you would need for software updates, Office 365, Windows 10 servicing. Or there was a question earlier about, servicing over the VPN. Sure, why not? Just make sure you're not pulling that content over your VPN. If you can't split, there's some VPN vendors that can't split tunnel based on FQDN or domain or URL. You're kind of out of luck because all of the stuff I just talked about, software updates, Office 365, Windows 10, those all use content delivery networks. And like there's no IP range to use for those. That's not just everything, right? It's just so wild west. We'll talk about a sort of a niche solution later on, but it's just not great. So again, another sort of gate here. Everything I'm going to talk about from this point on is going to make it worse if you can't do split tunneling, right? And that's why I think Bryan Mason said make sure verify that split tunneling is working, because we're going to talk about some stuff that says, well, what if we offloaded more stuff to the internet? And if you offload stuff to the internet, but what that means is, and you're not split tunneling either intentionally or just it's not working, you're actually going to make things worse, right? Because instead of just pulling something from on-prem, you're going to pull it from on-prem and then back to the internet, right? So you're going to create a double hop where you didn't have before. So want to make super clear, everything I talk about at this point is going to make it worse without this. So here's the big one, and I think this is actually an easy one if you have split tunneling enabled. Right? So I actually, where do I put this slide? It should go on the easy side of things, because if you have split tunneling, this is super easy. But if you don't, then it's hard, right? So Rob York wrote a great blog here, and you're going to see right in the title, it talks about Cloud Management Gateway. This blog post, except for a very small chunk of it, has nothing to do with Cloud Management Gateway. And so almost everything he talks about in there is fully applicable to a VPN client as well. And the key to this is okay, great. So I have a VPN connected client. It's talking to my on-prem stuff, but I'd rather it not pull data over that VPN. I'd rather pull it from the internet, right? That's the goal. Even though you're connected to VPN, even though you could pull it from your on-prem DP, I don't want to do that. So a couple requirements here, right? Current branch 1902 or more, or newer. You need some dedicated boundary groups for your VPN clients, right? So you need to, because the setting we're going to talk about is dedicated to that boundary group, because in 1902 they enabled this prefer cloud-based sources. Before, this was called prefer cloud distribution point, but in 1902 they changed that to prefer cloud-based sources versus over on-prem sources. And the key there is that switch from just talking about DPs to also Windows Update, right? So Windows Update or Microsoft Update, the cloud source, that is a cloud-based resource. And so if you enable this on a boundary group, And you enable this next thing on the update deployment. You say, hey, if software updates aren't on the distribution point, and yada, 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 go ahead and get it from Microsoft to update. What this will do is your VPN client, what's supposed to happen, and I say that because you can see the point at the bottom here. What's supposed to happen is your client talks to your management point and says, hey, where can I get this content? Give me a list of places to put the content. And a client, like, there's whole sessions at MMS about, how does a client pull content, right? Because it gets all these sources, and then it's this whole hierarchy of, well, I like PureCache, but in my PureCache, BranchCache, and then DP, local DP, and then there's all this whole long thing. And what the setting does, prefer cloud-based, is simply just reprioritizing. It's saying, hey, if I get content, and one's from an on-prem DP and one's from Microsoft, right? I'm going to prefer the Microsoft content location over it. And so that's what makes this, to me, so beautiful, so easy to do. Is that your VPN clients, yes, they could pull it from a DP, but they won't, or at least they shouldn't. Now, I've had a couple of people who've implemented this. Well, really one. There's one person I know who implemented this, and it just wasn't working. Now, and I didn't dig into it. I didn't read thousands of lines of logs. But if this doesn't work, Mike Terrell's got you covered. He wrote a great blog here about how do you force config manager VPN clients to get patches from Microsoft updates. And somebody asked about this blog, and the crux of it is this. Is enable that same setting I talk about above here, not the prefer cloud-based, but the update deployments. If you enable pulling software update content from Microsoft, if it's not available in a DP, and the crux of it is don't make it available to a DP, right? That when your VPN clients ask for content location, they don't get one for software update content. Now, how do you do that? Again, Mike goes into that in detail, but super high level. It's about having a distribution point that's dedicated to your VPN boundary group, right? So your boundary group, you have a dedicated boundary group for your VPN clients. That boundary group only has a single has a dedicated set of distribution points, and that those distribution points do not have the software update content, right? So if your clients can't download from a DP, can't download from a DP, then they're not going to, right? If the content's not there, then it's game over. So yeah, but it takes a dedicated distribution point, right? You got to split. You got to do that. You got to set all that stuff up, which is fine, and it'll work perfectly. But let's go on. Great. So that's software update content, right? So if you got slammed on Patch Tuesday, again, you probably already had to figure that out. Right? We've been through one or two of those already. But what about other stuff? Let's say you've kind of helped that. Yeah, exactly. It's foolproof, but not idiot-proof. What about apps and third-party updates, right? And the answer to that is, dude, you're getting to CMG, right? If you want to offload the content of apps and third-party updates off of your VPN line, again, assuming split tunneling, the solution there is Cloud Management Gateway. That to me is like the biggest. It's a huge selling point for a cloud management gateway beyond the connectivity things, right? I don't want to say that's the only reason, but what does the CMG bring to the table that internet-based client doesn't, or a VPN doesn't? Well, you can allow you to take those apps and third-party updates and throw them out in the internet. And so it's, again, very, very easy to do. You enable your CMG as acts as a cloud distribution point, and very clear, act as a cloud. So cloud distribution point used to be an actual role. You could actually enable a cloud distribution point, and that's deprecated. There's the docs, and because what the team did is you kind of realize that DP itself does very little. There's almost no requirements for a DP in terms of memory and CPU, right? Like it's totally disk space and disk IO bound, and the CMG is really ultimately just a VM. You can see people have running in Azure. You can see people log into it. It's still, for whatever reason, Server 2012 R2 based for whatever reason. It's not supported, but it's just a VM sitting there. So why not use that we don't want to put the data on that VM. And so what they did is they just enabled that content to sit in Azure storage, and then your CMG acts as a cloud distribution point by basically proxying that data for you, right? So what this allows you to do is treat it like a distribution point. You can push your content up to the cloud, and if the content's there, now you can just pull it right from the cloud, from the internet, right? The internet is the cloud. And so with a CMG, if you have big apps or small apps, it doesn't really matter. But if that is killing you, the third-party updates and the apps, if that's killing you, a CMG allows you to offload that to the internet, and then with split tunneling, it'll get you, it'll reduce your traffic WAN usage. Now, there's a niche benefit here. I talked earlier about. There's a really interesting niche benefit. Remember, I was talking about the VPN clients that don't support FQDNs or URLs or domains, and they only support IP ranges. It's super sad. You should probably fix that problem. But Kent Wigan, another PFE, has a great blog out there, and he's really super clear. Like, don't do this if you have a better way. There are better ways, right? Do it by FQDN and URL if you can. But if you can't, you've got a script out there, because the IP ranges for CMGs are more well known. They're not static. Okay, they're going to change, but they're well documented, and it's a much smaller range than Star.star. And it's definitely a real range, unlike a content delivery network. Let's say you can't do cloud, right? For reasons, whether it's political or it shouldn't be cost, but what lets you can't? Well, what if I just did internet-based client management? So that's like IBCM is legitimate. It's a solution. It's a solution to the connectivity issue, though. It's not a solution to third-party updates or applications, right? Because there's no cloud component. You can't offload that data in there. And then, so for me personally, this is just my personal opinion. If I look at IBCM versus an always-on VPN solution, I go with the always-on VPN solution all the time, if I can, because though all the work to set up IBCM versus always-on VPN is pretty similar, right? You need PKI, you need a bunch of stuff to make that happen. And always-on VPN is going to solve a bunch of non-config manager problems, right? A bunch of, if you have some third-party security software, or you have some legacy line of business apps that have a client-server architecture, right? It'll solve more, always-on VPN solves more connectivity problems than internet-based client management does, in my opinion. So to me, I put always-on VPN over IBCM for that reason. A couple of base tips. Again, we're not going to. This isn't a deep dive. I'm not going to show you, how in 10 minutes or less you can set up a CMG. 2002, we talked a little bit about this, right? Adam was talking about this. Introduced token-based enrollment, and there's the docs for it. I was really excited when I saw them talk about this in the technical preview, and I was like, "Whoo! This is was coming at the right time. We're gonna solve this whole. Hey, I want to set up a CMG, but my machines have already flown the coop. What do I do?" I was super excited about it. And then Jason Sandys totally let me down. But sorry, he didn't let me down. He just deflated my hopes. Thanks, Jason. How this works is generally your clients are going to renew a token every month, and that token is valid for 90 days. Now, if you need to, you can actually generate and send a bulk token, right? And so that, I think, has a 30-day limit, but the idea is you can generate this token for multiple clients. And that sounds great. The downside is that this requires that the client already be 2002 and above, right? Like the client, 2002 client needs to be installed in order for this whole token thing to work. And honestly, if you can you've already sort of solved the management problem if you can upgrade the client, right? At least in my opinion, right? Like that's where you need someone with local admin, right? If you can install a new client, then you're already well on your way to better management, and you probably don't need a bulk token or a token at all. The other thing is that there's really no right. There's no way for a user, right? There's no way for just to give them this token. It's like 200 and Lord knows what characters. There's no just easy way for like, hey, here's the token, use it. Like it's part of the install. You have to run ccm setup.exe and give it that token. Moving on, you don't need PKI. That's great. That's what this token stuff kind of does. But you do need certs, and I see a lot of people get confused on all the trust scenarios for CMG, because it's the on-prem trusting the CMG, and the CMG trusting the client trusting the CMG, and the client trusting the on-prem. Like there's all these interrelations. And Jason, a month ago or so, wrote a really beautiful blog article. Thank you, Jason. Talking about those choices. Well, I highly recommend, if you're thinking about CMG, go read that, because he's going to talk about those individual trust parts and then your options for those, and then some of those interrelate, right? So that's why it gets all shades of confusing. Lastly, the costs are not too dang high. Rob York's been yelling at that for a very, very long time. Johan, though, guy's got 15,000 followers on Twitter. You think he can put some data together? So he did, and he's updating that as it goes along. So if anyone on here is actually running a CMG, talk to Johan and tell him how much it actually talks, because he's trying to run a running tally. Oh, I'm actually ahead of myself. That's impressive. That almost never happens. I'm talking way too fast. So let's say you have a CMG and you have a VPN, right? That can get interesting because how does the client react in that scenario, right? So if the VPN is running and it connects to your internal infrastructure, then for all intent and purposes, it's an intranet. It's on the internet. And that might be problematic, right? You set up that CMG so you could offload the stuff we talked about. And yeah, it's kind of a tricky solution. It's a tricky situation. And just yesterday, the day before, that top blog article there, Cloud Management Gateways in Microsoft Environment. So go read that. It's a great talks about this in great detail. Talks about how Microsoft is dealing with that, right? In a high level, there's a couple of things you can do. You're going to take that CMG, you're going to add it again to you're going to add that the CMG and only the CMG to your VPN boundary group, because that gets a management point, right? A cloud management point out on the internet. And then you're going to make sure you enable this clients prefer used management point specified in boundary groups, right? And that's the path to where those things are. We talked a little bit earlier about that. Somebody had asked about, well, I got all these management points, and we talked a little bit about enabling that. But that's key. These two things, and hopefully what's going to happen there is that your device is on the VPN, is connected, and it's going to think it's on the intranet. But the only MP it has is the CMG, and so it's going to talk to the CMG and ask the CMG where to get all the data, and that should generally work for you. In that article, they actually at the top there they go into a little detail. Microsoft in some situations has actually gotten as drastic as reinstalling the client and saying, making it internet only, right? I think that's it's not a solution I'd want to jump to. But they've had to do it for certain reasons. Again, I don't want to re-explain it because they do a good job there. But it's an option. If for whatever reason your configuration really isn't working right now, you could go and install the client and say, actually, sorry, I think it's not even reinstall the client. They have some registry keys you can configure, and it'll just force that client to always consider itself to be on the internet, and that way you're forcing it to use the CMG. So we're almost done. Like I said, I'm actually kind of ahead of my time. I want to talk about these just very, very in brief. And again, we actually kind of talked about these again earlier in our round table there. What about Intune or code management? I think these are totally valid options. Absolutely. If you were on Intune or a specific or code management before you send everyone away, that's great, right? In fact, I just wasted almost 60 minutes of your life, right? You're not having the problems that people with on-prem infrastructure are having, at least not at the same scale, right? So they're totally valid options, but there's no free lunch with them either in terms of getting to them, right? So again, if you're not already in a managed state, this is what we were talking about with Adam Gross and I were talking about, right? There's to force Intune enrollment basically requires that device is in a managed state, right? And there's the docs. There's a link there to all the enrollment options you have, provisioning package and GPO, and there's a bunch of different ways you can force an endpoint to enroll in Intune or co-management. But all of those are going to require, if you want to do it in bulk, if you want to force it, all those things are going to take local administrative access to that box, whether that's again through group policy or config manager itself. So, which means that device is you're already reaching that device. You can already manage that device. The same thing with co-management. Even if you had co-management enabled before you send everyone home, again, this has come up Reddit. Well, yeah, I set up a co-management, and can I just move the updates slider over? And you can, but those devices need to be able to reach out to that management point to get that new machine policy, right? So if you've enabled co-management in general, but you haven't moved that slider, and that device can't reach in to get that new device policy either through the CMG or the VPN, then you're still out of luck, right? And so what this means is Intune or co-management, while they're valid options, they're not going to solve any immediate barn burning problem, right? They're not something you're going to do quickly. And they're not going to they're going to take a machine from a unmanaged state and bring it into a managed state. And so I view these as viable, but they're long-term options, not short-term solutions. So if you're on the fence right now of saying, well, we like Windows Update for Business or Intune's, the way that Intune will allow us to get rid of WSUS, and I've been trying to write this blog for 6-8 months now, because the Intune update team has put into public preview feature update deployments, FUD. I love that they picked FUD as the acronym. And when I pointed that out to them, it was really, really great to watch them kind of facepalm that they picked FUD. But they have feature update deployments, which to me is a huge obstacle removed, right? Huge obstacle. You can now granularly, if you're not aware, I should have had a slide on this, but you can very granularly control the feature update deployments without tying that to your Windows Update for Business or your quality update ranks, right? So if you want to apply quality updates every month, but you want to be able to stay on a specific feature update for as long as you want, a feature update deployment will allow you to do that. Okay, so one last thing we're going to talk about here, and it's going to be very, very brief. What if I just open port 80 to the internet? And I want to make it super clear. This is not a hypothetical question I'm asking because I think it's funny. Multiple people have asked it, right? And one person, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. It was phrased in my boss asked this question, help me explain what not to do. And it's just the worst idea I've ever heard in my life. Do not just take your internal config manager infrastructure and open port 80 to the internet and let devices talk to it. That is, I just want to keep saying no. Config manager has a whole PowerShell module for trying to attack config manager, and there's been some great presentations at MMS about how to use config manager for evil, and the last Jazz there was the securing the castle, beautiful stuff. If you can get access to config manager, you tend to own an organization, right? It's really game over. You have an agent running as local system on almost everything. If it's on your domain controllers, it's done. So the idea of taking that infrastructure and just opening up port 80 to the internet so that your clients can reach it to get into a managed state is not worth it. Do not do it. Okay, I'm about 5 minutes early, which is really rare for me. So I'm open to questions. You can tell me how wrong I got it. And I'd love to hear if anyone has any other ideas. And I know, like I said, I know a lot of you have probably done some portion or some version of some of these things. And I'd love to hear how great or poorly it went. Crickets. Now you're making me wonder if I just spoke for 60-ish minutes and nobody heard me.
Where are you? All quiet.
That's my child laughing at me. Not with me, at me.
That was great, Brian. Thank you.
Oh. Thanks.
I was told that there would be onesies. Very disappointed.
No, right? I really thought about it, but it is really nice and beautiful here in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and bad enough you see somebody unshowered. You want to see like somebody sweating, and the answer to that is yes. I know you do, but I wasn't willing to sacrifice quite that.
I see a question here, Brian, about do you need local admin access to do local Intune enrollment?
Right. So what I'm going to suggest is go to that link in that blog, because there's like 15 different ways to enroll something in Intune, right? There's a whole bunch of different ways. My interpretation, and again, I could be wrong on this, is there's user-based, and then there's, what do they call it? There's a user-based enrollment and not whatever, everything
Like
else.
device-based or something.
Yeah, it's everything else. And the user-based, I think they don't need it, but you need your users to go and do it, right? Like you need your users to go to start and settings and accounts, and like they need to go do all that stuff. Someone
Right.
tell me if I'm wrong on that, but like you can't force them to do that, right? And I think some people said earlier when we were talking about this, we're like, well, hey, use conditional access, or basically shut their VPN off, right? If you shut the VPN off, suddenly people will follow those instructions, right? If they can't get their email, and so I guess that's one way. But it's, if you want to do, to me that just doesn't work at scale, right? Like or maybe you have to. If you have to, fine. Like, and then you're just gonna have to just deal with the fact that your call center is going to get inundated with these kind of calls, and that's like, it can work. It's not a great enterprisey solution. The enterprisey solutions require local admin. I think, right, to run that script, or I guess like group policy, right? Group policy can do things, and it's running as local admin, right? So I convinced somebody they need leadbat. Beautiful. Yes, absolutely. Everyone needs leadbat. There's just no reason. I almost felt like I was spending too long when I was doing this up. I was like, I got like 6 things on leadbat. Do people need that much convincing? But I'm glad it worked once. So Steve asked for CMG token-based auth, no search needed from PKI. I'm going to refer you to Jason's blog on that one, because I can't memorize all that. I believe with the token-based, you don't need PKI, but the token stuff is only 2002 that I can confirm. So your clients, and that was the thing that I got caught, because I was seeing this technical preview. I was like, oh, that's going to be awesome. We don't need, but if you were disconnected, you can conceivably like send this token to your users somehow. But the client itself needs to be updated to 2002 first. Awesome. Thanks, Justin, for confirming. Yeah, and that's just why Jason wrote that. I know, like, because again, as the moderator of SCCM, I live and breathe there. Like, it's just anytime CMG comes up, it's like people are just scratching, like, what's the search? I don't, because it's enhanced HTTPS, but it's like, it gets confusing. And so Jason's blog is really, really beautiful, because it's just, you have options, but those options apply to different parts of that triangle, right? Between, your on-prem and CMG and your clients and your internal using CMG to create this bridge, right? That's essentially what's happening. And so